Rajshekar, for your questions and judging this session. So we will
Thank you.
now, I now had
Yes,
move
sir. We
on
have
to
the papers presentations.
yeah.
So we have 6 papers for 1 hour. So 10
Yeah.
minutes for each, 8 minutes for presentations and 2 minutes for discussion.
Sure.
So request the president and secretary to invite the HOD and the other faculty and the judges for this. You can formally inaugurate president and secretary.
Harish.
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 Please go ahead, Venkat. Let us.
Venkat, please. You can invite the HOD and hand over the proceedings.
So
You
to
can
start
invite the
the
judges.
papers presentation for today, I would like to invite Dr. Ravi Shankar, the HOD of Sagar Hospitals. Please take over, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Venkat.
Judges for this.
Yeah.
Srikar and Mahesh, both are there.
Okay,
Both
right.
are language.
Okay.
On behalf of the the Department of Surgery, I thank the Surgical Society of Bangalore and the office bearers, Dr. Venkat and Dr. Harish and the EC for this opportunity. Without wasting much time, we'll start with the presentation. I invite the judges formally to this session. The first, we are now increasingly, the population is becoming geriatric and we are increasingly operating on elderly patients. So one of the things that we have noticed is these patients are very frail. There is no formal assessment of this frailty, nor there is any assessment of how you should deal with these patients. Are there any steps to pre-optimize these patients? So what happens if we operate on frail patients? So this is a vexing question which we had to answer. So this is a prospective study of such a question that arose in our mind. So with this, Ajit Darandale will present our experience of operating on patients with frailty. Ajit, yours.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, respected presidents, secretary of the Surgical Society of Bangalore, all my respected teachers and dear colleagues. Today, I am presenting my paper on a prospective study of effect of frailty on surgical outcomes in elderly patients. Frailty is a relatively new concept in geriatric literature. There are various definitions, one of which says that it is the condition of being weak and delicate. It is an entity which is described as decreased physiological reserve. Elderly people are a rapidly growing part of the world and consequently more surgeries will be performed in them. Unfortunately, if there is any post-operative complication, that may lead to significant morbidity, mortality, increased hospital stay, and subsequent increase in cost of the treatment for the patient. There have been various studies in the Western literature which studied frailty and found it to be a reliable predictor of morbidity, mortality, extended length of hospital stay, discharge to a nursing facility, and increased cost. However, there is paucity of Indian data. So we decided to study the effect of frailty on outcomes of elderly hospitalized patients undergoing major surgery in our very own Indian setup. So before starting the study, we obtained ethical committee clearance for the same, and preoperative assessment of frailty was done, which included 5 components of the FRIDE criteria, which is a validated criteria, including shrinking, grip strength, exhaustion, low activity, and slowed walking speed. Each domain was given a score of either 0 or 1, and patient was termed as not frail when the total is 0 to 1, and frail when the score was 2 to 5. Shrinking was defined as self-reported unintentional weight loss of more than 4.5 kgs in last 1 year. Grip strength was measured using handheld dynamometer in dominant hand, and mean of 3 values was taken. Criteria for weakness was based on BMI and gender. Exhaustion was measured by responses to questions about effort and motivation, and low activity was ascertained by inquiring about leisure time activities done in the last 2 weeks. Slowed walking speed was measured by the speed at which the patient can walk 15 feet, and the final time was taken by taking average of 3 trials of walking at normal pace. Ours is a prospective observational study done between October 2018 and June 2020, done at Sagar Hospitals, Jayanagar, Bangalore. We included all patients above 60 years of age undergoing elective major surgical intervention like laparotomy, thoracotomy, cholecystectomies, hernias, irrespective of any sex. We excluded patients who had neurological disorders like Parkinson, previous stroke, cognitive impairment or depression, and those who had poor manual dexterity or inability to breathe. We also excluded patients who were undergoing emergency surgery and those who were not willing to participate in our study. This was my pro forma for data collection. Coming to the results, out of 108 patients, we included 80 patients and excluded 28 patients. Of 80 patients, 30 patients were found to be frail according to the Friday criteria, and 50 patients were found not to be not frail. Out of 30 frail patients, 19 patients landed up in complications, while only 9 patients out of 50 non-frail patients had complications. We had comparable number of patients in each group. We had a male predominance in our study with 61% of the population being male. However, sex-wise frailty, there was no significant difference as denoted by p-value of 0.26. 73% of patients in frail group had comorbidities, while 58% of patients in non-frail group had comorbidities. However, it was not statistically significant as denoted by the p-value of 0.167. As we can see here, in frail patients, the length of hospital stay was prolonged with p-value statistically significant. In frail patients, 63% of the patients had complications, while in the non-frail group, 18% of the patient had complications, which statistically significant p-value. Wound infection, seroma, ileus were the major complications we encountered. There were 3 deaths in our study, all belonging to the frail group, and there were 0 deaths in the non-frail group. We found the association between frailty and complication using odds ratio, which came to 2.11, implying that the frail patients are twice as likely to have postoperative complications, morbidity, mortality as compared to the non-frail patients. There are various studies in literature from Norway, USA, Canada, Singapore, which have concluded that frailty is consistently associated with adverse outcomes of surgery. In our setup, also our study is congruent with the findings in the literature. The association between frailty and adverse postoperative outcomes was consistent in our study, regardless of the type of surgery performed. And frail patients should be screened for frailty before undergoing major surgeries. And if found to be frail, need to be prehabilitated by building good nutrition, giving them exercises, lifestyle modification like smoking cessation, cessation of alcohol consumption, and medical optimization. From our study, we conclude that frailty in older surgical patients is associated with higher rate of postoperative complications, mortality, and prolonged length of hospital stay. These are my references. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ajit. That was well within time. Now the paper is open for discussion. Judges, please.
Can I ask a question?
Can I talk, sir?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, go ahead. Please go ahead. Whoever wants to talk.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, a very nice paper. Very nice paper. The question I wanted to ask is, they are not really a comparable group. We have one who are on a weak side and one who are nutritionally, optimized. So it's a totally two groups which are not matching each other. That's my take on it. And another thing is, initially you mentioned that it is above 60 years, but what I would suspect should be above 65 years as elderly population. what is your take on the group distribution? Means you are having one side a very weak population. Naturally, their outcomes will be poorer compared to a group which is doing well. So, what was your main intention of this study?
Sir, actually, all the patients we are taking in literature, they have mentioned above 65 years of age, but because we are a private institute, the number of patients is less. So we reduced it to above 60 years of age, sir. And above 60, we are classifying them as frail and non-frail, sir. So above 65 is our criteria. Above 60 is our criteria. So
Fine.
in that we'll describe as frail and non-frail, sir.
Okay.
Can we go on to the next paper? Please stick on to your time. 8 minutes for presentation, 2 minutes for discussion. Please. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, we'll move to the next paper. So we know that laparoscopic surgery, now we are in the COVID era where it is devastated the communities, and it is surgical community is no different. So we need to see what is happening in the COVID in terms of surgical patients. So this is our take on the spectrum of COVID-19 infection among surgical patients. To present this is Dr. Indraja.
Shall I start, sir?
Yeah, please.
Good evening, respected President and Secretary of Surgical Society of Bangalore, to all my teachers and dear colleagues. Today, I am going to share about spectrum of COVID-19 infection among surgical patients. The coronavirus pandemic represents huge challenge in terms of demand of healthcare professionals in view of more than 3 crore cases and over 3.9 lakh deaths. The effect has significant impact on surgical practice, with all specialties writing guidelines to manage during this crisis. So it is thus important to keep up to date with latest guidelines to provide better healthcare to the patient. The prioritization of surgical services should be careful balance between the patient needs and resource availability. The target should always delay or avoid surgery until it is feasible. And when we look into the comorbid conditions, we have to look into the comorbid conditions that impact the primary surgical outcome and threat to patient life. The aim of my study to see the effect of COVID-19 infection in perioperative period and their outcome. The study was conducted during March 2020 to June 21. It is a prospective observational study conducted in South Hospital, Bangalore, which is a tertiary care hospital. We had included all patients coming to the Department of the General Surgery, Oncosurgery, as well as Thoracic Surgery, OPD. When we look into the hospital demographics, we did notice a 36% decreasing number of patients came to the OPD, and average of 21.8% decreasing number of surgeries done during this pandemic compared to the previous year. When coming to the study demographics, the number of patients who were positive preoperatively and postponed their surgery were 6, and 3 patients who were preoperatively negative and acquired infection during postoperative were 3, and 4 patients who was diagnosed with COVID-19 infection and underwent surgery that could not be delayed, and 3 patients who recovered with recent COVID-19 infection and underwent surgery within 1 month. And we would also like to mention 2 atypical presentations of COVID-19 infection. And among 4 patients who were positive preoperatively on routine workup for surgery, we advised 4 patients a mandatory 14 days quarantine according to the guidelines. And one patient who was asymptomatic, patient had a doubt, and they repeated COVID RT-PCR outside, which came as negative. And we advised that patient to take physician opinion, and all other investigations were normal. So patient had persistent pain abdomen, hence underwent surgery after 1 week. And one patient who was under the observation of physician was died due to the complications of COVID-19 infection. And 3 patients who were negative preoperatively underwent surgery as usually. And in postoperative period, due to the gradual worsening of the symptoms and in the suspicion of COVID-19 infection, a repeat RT-PCR was done, which turned out to be positive. And all three patients showed features of COVID-19 infection on imaging studies and raised inflammatory markers. And all three patients eventually expired due to the complications of COVID-19 infection. And 4 patients who were diagnosed with COVID-19 infection underwent surgery. Of this, 1 patient underwent tracheostomy and and 1 patient diagnosed with shield of diverticular perforation and underwent emergency surgery, and patient died due to the sepsis on postoperative day 1. And 1 patient with perianal abscess underwent surgery, and during the follow-up period, patient had developed bleeding from the operated site because of the anticoagulants, and he readmitted further and treated and recovered well. And 1 patient with acute calculus cholecystitis, we advised her conservative management, but patient had persistent pain. So hence she underwent surgery after 1 week and she recovered well. Post-operative period were uneventful. And 3 patients who recovered from recent COVID-19 infection within 1 month. Of these 3 patients, 1 patient had sequel of COVID-19 infection, developed pneumatocyst and underwent pneumatocyst excision and recovered well. The other 2 patients diagnosed with acute cholecystitis and perianal abscess underwent surgery. And both these patients post-operative period were and recovered well. And in this context, I would like to mention about the 2 atypical presentations of COVID-19 infection. One is a 50-year-old male came with acute abdomen. On day of admission, COVID antigen negative. All routine investigations were normal, and CT abdomen showed diffuse wall thickening of distal jejunal and ileal loops, query cause. On the day of admission in the night, patient suddenly developed breathlessness and tachycardia and tachypnea and shifted to ICU. And patient started on inotropes and other supportive measures. A repeat COVID rapid PCR done, which came as positive. All inflammatory markers was raised. In spite of all measures, patient gradually deteriorated and died due to the complications of COVID-19 infection. The other patient, a 40-year-old female, diagnosed with acute appendicitis outside. On day of admission, COVID rapid PCR positive. And when we asked the patient retrospectively, she had a history of fever, and they already given COVID RT-PCR outside, which came as negative. Due to the ambiguous result, we did COVID antibodies that came as reactive, and HRCT was normal, and patient had persistent pain abdomen, hence we taken up for the surgery. And post-operatively, patient suddenly developed breathlessness, and in view of desaturation, intubated and shifted to medical ICU. And her inflammatory markers was raised very high, and repeat COVID RT-PCR done, which came as positive, and patient managed in critical care setting and recovered well and discharged. And when we look into the hospital morbidity, we do look like 2% rise in the mortality when this is attributed to the case fatality rate, 2% case fatality rate of COVID-19 infection.
Indraja, can you conclude?
Yes, sir. In our data, there was a mortality of 4 patients who underwent surgery during this pandemic. So in view of high morbidity and mortality, elective surgeries and procedures should be deferred during this pandemic. Thank you, sir.
That was a good presentation well within time. So the paper is now open for discussion. Questions from the judges and audience, please.
It's a good presentation, and I think extremely relevant to the current time. So you would defer surgeries. Why do you want to defer surgeries with the patients with COVID? What is the main reason you would think?
So, because of the increased morbidity, sir, like patient with comorbid conditions, if they have to undergo surgery, there is a risk of complications of those.
So the take-home point would be that patients with COVID-19 infection should defer surgeries, whatever be the reason, unless life or limb threatening, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? There is one question in the chat box. What was the indication for HRCT? I didn't know which particular patient they were alluding to, but there was one question about why did you do HRCT?
So actually, that COVID in the atypical presentation, we did one HRCT for one patient, sir. That COVID came as positive, and outside the RT-PCR test it came as negative. So we had a suspicion. Because of that, we did HRCT.
Okay.
Ravishankar sir,
if
can
I
we go
can-
on to the next paper?
Yeah. Okay. Thank
Any
you.
questions,
Indranil.
please type in the chat box. Either the presenter or their faculty will answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Indrija. We'll move on to the laparoscopic surgeries as such. Usually, we say the pain is less, but still pain is a significant factor in the post-operative recovery of this patient. So we thought we'll have a look at the prospective observational study comparing the efficacies of the tab block, which is laparoscopically administered compared to the ultrasound administered tab block, and versus a third arm, which is parenteral analgesia, to see which is superior and whether there is any difference between the three groups. Over to you, Pawan.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, respected President and Secretary of Surgical Society of Bangalore, respected teachers, my dear colleagues. Today, I am going to present on comparing prospective observational study, comparing the efficacy of laparoscopic assisted transverse abdominis plane block versus ultrasound guided tab block versus parenteral analgesia in laparoscopic abdominal surgeries. Rafi first described a tab block in lumbar triangle of Petit. Tab block was one of the effective abdominal feed block, which is widely used to treat post-operative abdominal pain. The aim of tab block is to target the spinal nerves in the plane present between the internal oblique and transverse abdominis muscle and to deposit local anesthetic in that plane. It was believed that tab block was tab block under ultrasound guidance has following advantages for the laparoscopic. It allows accurate deposition of local anesthetic in the plane under vision, and it has lower rate of complications. It reduces opioid consumption. My aim was to compare the efficacy of laparoscopic tab block versus USG guided tab block versus parenteral analgesia for post-operative pain management in laparoscopic abdominal surgeries. Ethical committee clearance and informed consent from the patients was taken. The study subjects are distributed under 3 groups. The study was conducted at Sagar Hospital, Bangalore for a period of 6 months from December 2020 to May 2021. All the 3 groups were randomized using simple computer-generated randomization. Group A was laparoscopic tab block, where the tab block was performed by surgeon under laparoscopic visualization. The needle inserted through the skin until 2 puffs were felt, as the needle tip tenting the peritoneal wall without rupturing the peritoneal cavity. 0.2% ropivacaine at a dose of 1.5 milligrams are infiltrated on either side till the smooth wheel is seen. This is also known as Doyle's internal bulge sign. Group B was USG guided tab block, where anesthetic performed the procedure under USG guidance. Group C was non-tap infiltration, where the patients in this group purely managed with parenteral analgesics. For lower abdominal laparoscopic surgeries, tab block at the level of umbilicus is given at the anterior axillary line. For laparoscopic cholecystectomies, subcostal block on either side in the anterior axillary line. For first 6 hours of the surgery, all the patients in this group are given parenteral analgesics, only pentazocine. Beyond 6 hours after surgery, all groups will receive paracetamol 1 gram for pain less than 4 and 30 milligrams of pentazocine for pain more than 4. We included patients who were 18 years and above and scheduled for routine laparoscopic abdominal surgeries. We excluded patients who were refused to be part of the study and had emergency surgeries, hypersensitive to analgesic used in the study, and patients who underwent laparoscopic hernial repair, patients who underwent multiple surgeries in one admission, and patients with post-operative drain placement. We considered demographics, post-operative VAS score at rest and with movement, and post-operative nausea and vomiting, complications were recorded and calculated statistically with p-value less than 0.05 as significant. My primary outcome was to compare VAS score between the three groups at rest and with the movement, and to compare which require less quantity of analgesia post-operative. The secondary outcome to assess the early ambulation and cumulative pain post-operatively, and to compare side effect profile. This is the pro forma I had used for my study. Total 38 patients were included in the study, out of which with only 14 patients in the group A, 14 patients in group B, and 10 patients in group C, and 2 patients were excluded from group A and group B in view of drain placement. The most commonly performed procedure in all these three groups was laparoscopic cholecystectomy. This is the demographic data where I compared between all three groups in terms of gender, age, and BMI with comorbidities, and it was comparable. When we compare VAS score at rest and with movement, we didn't see any statistical significance. When we compare dosage requirement of pentagocin, it was higher requirement of pentagocin was noted in group C when compared to other groups, which was not statistically significant. When we compare in terms of morphine equivalent, the total consumption of analgesic requirement was more in group C when compared to other groups. The dosage requirement of paracetamol post 6 hours after surgery was comparable between the three groups. When we compare post-operative first walk, we noticed that group C had longer duration of mobilization, which was significant. However, the administration of tab block didn't affect the length of the hospital stay in the length of the hospital stay. When we compare vomiting, post-operative vomiting and nausea, it was higher in group C when compared to other groups, which was not significant. Tab block is a newer modality of pain management, gaining popularity in lab technical skills and supporting staff. It is an effective alternative means of post-operative pain management in surgical patients. When we compare the VAS scores, post-operative pain management was adequate with the tab block, reducing need for repeated analgesic administration. Requirement of pentagocin was significantly higher in group C as compared to group B, which indicating that tab block is an alternative method to opioids. Post-operative first walk was prolonged in group C in view of higher requirement of opioids, which causes a detrimental effect and increases the post-op mobilization. Yes, as per our initial data, we can conclude that tab block either via laparoscopic or under ultrasound guidance can serve as a reasonable alternative for post-operative analgesic management. However, there is no difference between the two techniques of tab block. These are my references. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, that was well within time. Well done, Pavan. The paper is now open for discussion.
Dr. Pavan,
Yes, sir.
Dr. Mahesh here. I have two questions. Have you checked how long does the tab block provide analgesia? Was there any average? Any check was made on that?
Sir, tab block, sir.
Post-operatively?
Sir, pardon, sir.
Post-operatively, how long does the tab block has provided analgesia for a particular patient, or was there any average time checked?
Sir, usually for mean up to my study, the mean tab block is for USG guided is 4 hours, sir, and
Okay.
laparoscopic tab block is 5 hours. Sir.
Okay, and one more question is, the first walk, was it by the patient themselves or was it assisted?
Sir, patient by themselves, sir.
They were able to get up by themselves and
Yes, sir.
ambulate it?
Yes, sir.
Was an observation made of this?
Sir, when the first ambulation done, we are with the patient only, sir, and we noted the time at the.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Rajshekar?
Was there any comparison made between epidural analgesia, post-op epidural analgesia, and the tab block?
Sir, no, sir. Only tab block with parenteral and lap tab blocks only, sir. We didn't consider.
Because parenteral with IV paracetamol is, I don't think it is a comparable. This one, IV paracetamol is not that powerful analgesic. You have to compare with either tramadol or diclofenac, that sort of things.
Sir, some patients will have some other comorbidities. So
Yeah, I
health
know.
outlook has some disadvantages. No, so that's
Yeah,
why-
clear in clear cut indications.
Yes.
Ravishankar sir, can we move on to the next paper?
Yeah, thank you, Pawan.
Thank you, sir.
Move on to the next paper. See, the Whipple's procedure is one of the most difficult and challenging, technically challenging procedure a surgeon does. So we thought we'll have a look at a retrospective view of what we have done with our Whipple's procedure. This is a single center study looking at the long-term outcomes of a patient with the Whipple's procedure. To present this paper is a second year postgraduate, Dr. Hari Arasan.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, consultants and media friends. I'm Dr. Hari Arasan, second year in the residence of our hospital. Today, we'll see about a retrospective study of indications and outcomes of Whipple's procedure in our hospital. As we all know, pancreatic cancer is one of the leading causes of oncologic morbidity and mortality worldwide, and it generally occurs in the older population. In Western countries, pancreatic cancer is the fourth most common cause of cancer-related deaths, and only few % of patients can survive from this condition for more than 5 years. Mortality rate still reports to be 2 to 10% among high volume centers worldwide. However, the patients present with an advanced stage of the disease, and only 10 to 20% of them, the mass is even resectable. The most common indication for pancreatic adenoidectomy is carcinoma of head of the pancreas. And Alan Whipple in 1935 first described the modified Whipple's procedure, and it remains a complex surgery with a high morbidity rate. So it's been shown that 5-year survival following pancreatic adenoidectomy is approximately 15 to 20. However, the numbers varies from various studies across worldwide. So in this study, we report our experience in the treatment of resectable pancreatic cancer and periampullary neoplasms, with particular attention to evaluate the indications and outcomes and survival of the patients. So aim of this study is to see the indications, clinical outcomes of patients who underwent Whipple procedure in our institute. And this is a retrospective study conducted in Sagar Hospital, and the study period was 2010 to 21. And data collected from the surgical database. Patients were followed in telephonic manner, and perioperative mortality in this study was defined as death within 13 days of surgery. All the patients who had undergone Whipple's procedure from 2010 to 21 in our institute were included in the study, and patients were excluded where whose patients' data were missing and patient not willing to be part of study or could not be traced. The total patients were 16, and 15 patients were included for analysis because one patient was lost to follow-up. The age of the patient ranges from 25 to 70 years, and the sex incidence being male to female ratio of 2:1. So most common presenting symptom was jaundice and weight loss in 8 patients, and followed by the order of symptom frequency being pain abdomen and pruritus, followed by fever, vomiting, and other symptoms. All the patients underwent surgery in general anesthesia, and general anesthesia plus epidural anesthesia in 9 patients, and midline laparotomy incision were taken in all the 15 patients, and classical Whipple's pancreatic adenoidectomy was done in all 15 patients with feeding jejunostomy in 11 patients. 7 patients out of 15 underwent blood transfusion, and mean 3 units were transfused among 7 patients. And regarding the postoperative course, mean 3rd day jejunostomy feeds started, and oral feeds were started on 2 to 5 days, and suture removal was done in patients on 10 to 16 days in the average. Coming to the post-op diagnosis, out of 15 patients, 5 patients had ampullary growth, followed by duodenal adenocarcinoma, neuroendocrine tumor, and chronic pancreatitis in 1 patient, and head of pancreas and carcinoma distal CVD. This chronic pancreatic patient, he was presenting to us with pain abdomen and inflammatory mass in the head of the pancreas. Post surgery, it was found to be an inflammatory mass. And regarding the histopathology, the most common pathology being the adenocarcinoma, 7 patients being moderately differentiated and 4 well differentiated. 3 patients have neuroendocrine tumor and 1 inflammatory, like I mentioned before. So when we looked into the complications, we've seen various complications like intraoperative, postoperative, and long term. We'll look into each complication. 3 mortality cases out of 15 patients were noted, and 3 had surgical site infection, 2 bile leak, and 1 intraabdominal collection. This is a first mortality case of 56-year-old male present with pain abdomen and weight loss, and he was diagnosed with carcinoma tumor of the duodenum. He underwent Whipple procedure. Post surgery, he had a low output bile leak from brain, fever spikes, and tachycardia. Patient was conservatively managed, and post-operative day 6, he was intubated in ICU in view of desaturation, and patient died on post-operative day 12 in view of sepsis and multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. Coming to the second case of mortality, 60-year-old male with present with jaundice and pain abdomen. He had multiple comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, hepatitis B, and he was also ERCP stenting status post ERCP stenting, and patient was diagnosed with adenocarcinoma of ampulla. Post-operatively, he was on inotropes and patient was also re-intubated. And patient had fever spikes, thrombocytopenia, and raised ammonia levels. And patient died on post-operative day 5 in view of sepsis and multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. Coming to the final mortality case, which is 64-year-old male, present with jaundice and loss of weight and loss of appetite, and he was diagnosed with mid-common bile duct tumor and underwent Whipple procedure. Post-procedure, patient had persistent hypertension and he was on inotropes and he was re-intubated. Bedside ultrasound showed significant peritoneal collection, hence decided to re-explore. However, patient died on post-operative day 3 in view of disseminated intravascular coagulation. When we compare our study to the literature published worldwide, this is the first study from Tata Memorial Hospital from Mumbai, second from World Journal of Surgery Oncology, third from International Journal of Surgery, and this one from Indian Journal of Research done in Hyderabad Osmani Medical College. As we can see, post-op complication, the values are mostly comparable when we compare with other literature, and all the complications which are studied and values are mostly comparable. And out of 15 patients, one patient underwent re-exploration and one patient had recurrence, which was last year, and patient developed recurrence after 1 year, and she's in palliative chemotherapy now. And mortality, like I mentioned, is 3 patients. So coming to the staging and follow-up, out of 15 patients, total number of patients 15, the average size of the tumor was 2 centimeters and average T in stage was T2N0. And the notes positive questions were 2 among 15 and patients who received chemotherapy were 2. So 5 years follow-up, and out of 15 patients, out of 3 perioperative mortality, 12 patients have completed, out of 12 patients, 8 patients has completed 5-year follow-up, and all the 8 patients are disease-free. Hence, the overall 5-year survival of patients in our study is 72.7%, which is very good. When we look into this diagram, it is very clear. So these are the patients who have completed 5-year follow-up, and 1 patient has completed 11-year follow-up, and 2 patients had completed 10 years, 2 patients 9 years, and 1 patient 8 years, and 2 patients 5 years. So these 8 patients have completed 5-year follow-up, and they are doing well. Coming to the review of literature. So Colosi et al. In his retrospective multicenter cohort study shown that 5-year overall survival was 67.9%. However, the local regional or distant metastasis was found to be 44.1%. And our study, when we compared to various factors which were analyzed in the study, like age, male-female ratio, symptoms, blood transfusion. So all the values are grossly comparable. As you can see, most common presenting symptom was jaundice and lean transfusion with 3, and most common histopathology is ampullary growth ductal adenocarcinoma. So the values are comparable. Hence, with this data, I like to conclude that in spite of being a low volume center, our study results are comparable to the literature, particularly with a very good 5-year survival rate. These are my references. Thank you.
Well done, Hari. Well within time. The paper is now open for discussion.
What is the high volume center for pancreatic surgeries?
Like, sir, make more numbers of
What number? There is a definition. That is why I'm asking you.
Not aware of it, sir. Sorry.
Around 20 surgeries minimum per year, both for the hospital and for the surgeon. Anything less than that is a low volume center.
Thanks.
And their mortality is around 1 to 2%. So that makes a difference. When you are doing it regularly, your complications are less.
Thanks. Thank you.
Any other question?
Do you think, I'm Dr. Pai,
yes, sir.
Do you think the type of, your histopathology or the type of disease will give you a longer lifespan? Say periampullary carcinoma, you find it early. So naturally your, the patient's longevity increases. Whereas if it's actually head of pancreas carcinoma, the outcome tends to be poorer. So in your study, the people who have stayed longer, what was their morphological type of cancer?
Sir, actually the more it's like ampullary growth, sir.
Ampullary. So that is the main reason. So they present early and, your surgery would be curative. Okay. Right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Hari.
Thank you, sir.
We'll move on to the next paper, which is a study of effectiveness of camera training in navigation in laparoscopic surgery. Over to you. The camera work is usually relegated to the least important person in the team or the least experienced person in the team, which is okay, but we need to see whether that is actually true, or is there any role for training these people before we hand the camera to them. So Saurav with the answer to that question.
Thank you, sir. So am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes. Good evening, respected President, Secretary of the Surgical Society, my teachers and my dear friends. My paper is a prospective randomized control trial of the effectiveness of training in laparoscopic camera navigation using box trainer in novices. Camera navigation in laparoscopy is often considered a simple task and is usually handled by the less experienced, such as medical students and junior residents. It is, however, a complicated task requiring specific psychomotor and visual spatial skills, and inappropriate handling of the camera will lead to poor visualization that can lead to longer operating time, surgeon frustration, and compromise patient safety. My aim was to study the effect of training for laparoscopic camera navigation using box trainers and to assess for performance in an actual laparoscopic surgery. The objective was to examine whether the skills as a novice operating assistant was transferable to the operating theater after training on pre-designed fundamental laparoscopic camera holding tasks on a box trainer. My study was performed in Sagar Hospital, Tilak Nagar, which is a tertiary care hospital in Bangalore. The study duration was from December 2020 to April 21. A sample size of 20 with 11 in control and 9 in intervention was taken for this pilot study. I had included surgical novices, which were first-year surgical residents in other departments, and nurses with no prior experience in laparoscopic camera handling, and excluded anyone with any prior history of holding a camera. The residents were randomized into two groups using computer-generated random numbers. The intervention group received a 10 minutes demonstration of the task to be performed and 5 minutes to orient themselves with the equipment. The task was to simultaneously maintain optimal distance, horizon, and centering of laparoscopic image displayed on the screen of a box trainer during the entire course of the exercise. The laparoscopic box trainer using a 30-degree 5 mm scope connected to an LCD screen was taken. A Maryland forceps was used to move between the points. The LCD screen was divided into 4 equal halves with 2 lines passing through the center of the screen marked as C, and a white sheet of paper of size 15 into 15 centimeters was placed inside the box with 10 marks points in it in a jumbled up manner. On the first day of training, the investigator moved the instrument, navigated the camera so as to keep the instrument in the center of the screen. The total intervention time was 60 minutes per participants, and the time taken to complete the first and the last cycle, and the total number of cycles completed in 60 minutes were recorded. The second day of training was identical to day one, except that the participants had to hold the instrument in one hand while moving the camera in the other. The aim again was to move the instrument in one hand through the points while keeping the image in the center in the other hand. Total intervention time was 60 minutes, and the time taken to complete first and last cycle, and the total number of cycles completed in 60 minutes were recorded. At the end of the second day of training, the participants were assessed for completion of training as per the pre-designed training assessment tools, which was designed by the combination of OSATs and goals, which are validated training assessment tools by the first investigator. If any of the participants attained a cumulative score of 18 in this score, another additional day of training was added. A feedback form was also filled up at the end of training. The participants of the control group did not receive any training except a video describing laparoscopic camera handling and a video showing laparoscopic cholecystectomy. Following training, the participants of both the groups were asked to hold the camera in a short part of an actual laparoscopic cholecystectomy, that is, dissection of the gallbladder fossa, assisting the primary surgeon. The scoring was done by a single observer, which is a second investigator who had no knowledge if the residents had received training or not. The primary endpoint being the performance of the residents with respect to a pre-designed assessment tool, that is the total cumulative score in the objective structured assessment of camera navigation skills, which is a validated scoring tool. The secondary endpoints were measured in terms of time taken to complete first and last cycle and the total number of cycles in 60 minutes. This is the pro forma I had used to collect the data. Coming to the results, the age and sex distribution between the two groups were comparable, as well as the previous video game experience and the distribution of residents and nurses. When we looked at the difference in task completion time between the first and the last cycle on day one of training, we did notice a significant decrease in the time taken to complete the cycle, with an average number of cycles completed over 60 minutes being 11.5 cycles. A similar trend was observed in the second day of training as well, with an average number of cycles being 7.625 over 60 minutes, indicating that the training duration was adequate. When we compared the post-training completion score with respect to age and sex, we did not find any significance, indicating that neither of these factors played a role in net outcome of the performance of the participants. When we looked at the difference between the post-procedure score between the intervention and the control group as assigned by the second investigator, we did notice an increase in the score of with a mean of 13.5 in the investigation group, while a 10.1 in the control group, with the p-value being significant, indicated that the training did have an increase in performance of the participants. Although past video game experience has been shown to improve hand-eye coordination, the same was not reflected in our study. The participant feedback, the participants had mentioned that the training structure was good and they had learned something useful. However, many of them felt that the session length was too long and could have been reduced. The three key tasks which are essential for projection of an adequate image in laparoscopy is centering of an image, maintenance of a horizon, and optimum viewing distance. The laws of visual spatial cues makes it particularly challenging for novices who are the most frequent in holding the camera during surgery. Hence, training tools using simulators provide the stimulus for improvement of technical skills. M.K. Chamara, in his study using laparoscopic simulators with motion tracking, had shown that laparoscopic camera training improves not only 1D and 3D smoothness of camera navigation skills, but also instrument navigation skills. Frenzek had shown that participants with simulator-based training were more time efficient when compared to conventional theater-based laparoscopic camera training. An improper camera holding can lead to a longer operating time, as mentioned in the study by Zeng. Box trainers are particularly attractive, especially for novices, because of its lower cost, more realism, and equivalence to real-life laparoscopy in terms of identical equipment. Our study, using a novel training design, objectively demonstrated a proficiency gain curve which can be translated into real-life performance gains and comparable with other previous study. However, our being a pilot study requires a larger number of participants to realistically conclude the advantages over traditional practices. Hence, I would like to conclude that laparoscopic camera training is essential, as the camera person is the eyes of the surgeon, and novices gain the most from camera training and should form an integral part of surgical training curriculum. Thank you.
Well done, Saurav.
Yes.
Well within time.
Yes.
Because the paper is open for discussion.
Very good presentation, Saurav. Just I wanted to know, what are the two groups you had formulated, because it didn't materialize as you went further in your discussion.
Yes, sir.
You seem to have divided into two groups.
Yes, sir.
I didn't understand the purpose. Finally, you found that training helps, but that particular thing does not reflect two groups.
Yes, sir. So what I wanted to highlight is that we had taken novices who had previously no experience in holding a camera. So I had taken novices which had included people from general surgery residents who are first year residents who had no experience, as well as other departments as well. And I had divided them randomly into two different groups, one in the participant group and the other one is the control group. So in the participant groups, they had received the training for 2 days, and the control group just saw a video. They did not underwent any training.
But ultimately, it didn't reflect onto the, you have divided, but in the end, it didn't reflect what was the difference between the two groups.
Yes, sir. So as I had mentioned in this table, the difference between the post-procedure score, which was assigned by the second observer. I had no idea about the scores that was being assigned. This was done by a second observer. When we compared the intervention and control, we did see an increase in mean of 13.56 in the intervention group and 10.1 in the control group, and the p-value was significant.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Srikar. Thank you, Saurav. It was a very good.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
We'll move to the last presentation in the today's meeting, which is a comparative study between laparoscopic ventral hernia repair, which is the conventional, and the ETEC. See, the ventral hernia repairs are generating a significant amount of discussion and heat as to what is the best way of tackling the ventral hernias. So, and then there are so many new procedures that are coming through. So we thought that we should look at two different, one is the conventional intraperitoneal mesh repair, which is the IPOM and the IPOM plus, comparing that to the ETAP, which is extended totally extraperitoneal mesh repair, to see if there is any significant difference between the two. This is a initial pilot study. So this is going to be delivered by Janani, who is a second year resident. Thank you, Janani.
Good evening, respected President, Secretary, Surgical Society, Bangalore, my dear teachers and my dear friends. My paper is on comparative study between laparoscopic umbilical hernia mesh repair, between intraperitoneal only mesh repair and extended totally extraperitoneal mesh repair. So ventral hernias are protrusion through the abdominal wall except from the inguinofemoral region. Can be broadly classified as primary and acquired types. Primary hernias may be congenital and secondary hernias are traumatic or incisional hernias. Ventral hernia types include umbilical, parumbilical, epigastric and spidolin hernias. Ventral hernia mesh repair has become a common procedure, but the way in which it is performed still depends on the surgeon. The conventional techniques include open mesh hernioplasty, open retromuscular repair, and laparoscopic intraperitoneal onlay mesh repair. The newer technique, it includes laparoscopic extended totally extraperitoneal repair. So in IPOM is a commonly used technique. Mesh is placed directly onto the defect in abdominal cavity after entering the peritoneum. It can be associated with postoperative bulge or eventuation of mesh, seroma, adhesions, and to circumvent these problems like postoperative bulge or seroma, IPOM plus is introduced, which is sutured closure of fascia plus intraperitoneal mesh reinforcement. In ETIP, the principle is to create a larger space than what is done in TIP. The mesh is placed in retrorectus plane here. Here we use 3 ports, one 10 mm primary port at the left costal margin in the midclavicular line and 2 other 5 mm ports on the either side of the 10 mm port. The advantages of ETIP include vascularization of mesh from both the sides and less recurrence, fewer issues with fixation and fewer chances of bowel adhesions. A short video on ETIP procedure. So we'll create pneumo, that is we inflate carbon dioxide in the retrorectus plane here. First left side and the right side space is created through multiple blunt and sharp dissections. This is the retrorectus plane. Here from the other side where the retrorectus plane is already created, we are meeting the midline. And we'll have to create the retrorectus plane and the hernia is reduced here. Hernial contents are reduced. And we'll have to prepare our 15 by 15 polypropylene mesh. We fix the mesh in the subxiphoid region with loose transfacial sutures. This completes the operation. So the aim of my study is to evaluate and compare the effectiveness and feasibility of ETIP in comparison with IPOM procedure and also to study the short-term outcomes. Outcomes like postoperative pain and duration of hospital stay and complications following surgery is measured here. We studied pain score with VAS score at 3 hours, 6 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, 7th day and 30th day at rest and walking and coughing of the patient. Complications like neurovascular injury, seroma, and surgical site infection is assessed here. Mine is an ongoing prospective observational non-randomized study. All laparoscopic umbilical hernia mesh repairs during the study period was collected from study area like Sagar Hospital, Shanti Hospital and Research Center, Shanti Nursing Home and Devagiri Hospital. Totally 22 patients were collected. Study duration from September 2019 to February 2021. Period of follow-up 3 months following surgery. We included all patients above 18 years of age and elective umbilical hernia mesh repairs and excluded patients who refused to participate in study and patients who had underwent multiple surgeries in one admission. Surgical strategy includes choice of laparoscopic procedure was surgeon's preference. We used polypropylene mesh in all of them. Suture material used were PDS or Prolene. We used independent t-test and chi-square test to test the statistical significance. It is significant if p-value is less than 0.05. All patients were followed up by physical review and telephonic interview. So totally 28 ventral hernia cases happened during our study period, out of which 22 were umbilical hernia cases. We included 18 patients out of 22, 11 underwent IPOM and 7 ETIP. We excluded 4 patients due to exclusion criteria. Most of them were female patients in both the arms. and most of them belong to the age group of 50 to 60 years in both arms. The average size of defect is 2.5 centimeter in IPOM and 2.4 in ETEP. The size of mesh we used were for 5 patients 10 into 12 centimeter mesh, and for 6 patients 15 by 15 centimeter mesh. And for ETEP cases, all cases 15 by 15 centimeter mesh was used. Number of transfacial sutures we used were 4 in average number 4 in IPOM and 2 in ETEP. Average number of tackers 14 in IPOM. We didn't use any tackers in ETEP cases. Postoperatively, first walk was observed in 6 hours in IPOM and 3.5 hours in ETEP cases. Duration of surgery showed statistical significance with ETEP showing 210 minutes for average 210 minutes and IPOM 55 minutes. So duration of surgery was more with ETEP. Pain score at rest, the p-value was significant at 24 hours with regard to ETEP and IPOM. IPOM showed more pain than ETEP. And during walking or coughing, the statistical significance was observed with pain score at 24 hours and 48 hours. ETEP showing less pain than IPOM. Postoperative first walk was at 3.5 hours with ETEP and 6 hours in IPOM, which is also statistically significant. Duration of postoperative stay for almost all patients with regard to ETEP, one day post-op stay over there and 2 days in IPOM cases on average. There were no other complications observed in both IPOM and ETEP cases. Only one case of seroma was observed following ETEP. The patient was followed up by 1 week after surgery, but she didn't turn up for further investigation. Pain is significantly low in ETEP and is comparable with reported rates in literature. And patient who had undergone ETEP had significantly lesser hospital stay also. In comparison with meta-analysis of pain and functional outcome of ventral hernia mesh repairs, ETEP, the patients who had undergone ETEP will experience 30% less pain at 24 hours and 48 hours and is comparable with our study. In this respect, this study affirms the good short-term outcome. We compared the complications with the other meta-analysis containing 60 patients, 30 in each arm. There were 3 seromas in ETEP cases, which was statistically significant there. And as I said earlier, there was 1 seroma case, which is not statistically significant because of less numbers. So ETEP has got advantages like lesser post-operative pain and lesser hospital stay, but the most common disadvantages are seromas, linear alba dehiscence, and recurrence. And the long-term outcome of ETEP is yet to be studied in further studies. And regarding telephonic follow-up, it is in a resource-constrained country like India, this method is worthwhile and is also appreciated by patients. And also in this COVID pandemic, telephonic follow-up was very much helpful for us in following up the patients. So the limitation in my study, limited sample size and only short-term outcomes can be measured here. And personal follow-up for clinical assessment was affected due to COVID pandemic. With all its limitation, ETEP is an attractive option because of significantly lesser post-operative pain, lesser hospital stay, however with steep learning curve, without any significant difference in intraoperative or post-operative complication. However, long-term outcomes has to be measured to conclude whether it is still very effective than IPOM or IPOM plus. So thus I conclude ETEP, the study between IPOM and ETEP has to be, the many more meta-analysis are to be done and to further conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Janani. That was done well within time. So the paper is now open for discussion.
Ravi, may I? Dr. Kalaivani here.
Please. Yes,
Yeah,
please.
Janani, very interesting study, Janani. I just have one question. While doing ETEP, was there any peritoneal injury initially? And did you have difficulty in continuing with the ETEP?
No, ma'am. No peritoneal injury, ma'am, so far.
That is very good. And that seroma patient you said didn't turn up.
Yes, ma'am, didn't turn up.
Right.
First week follow-up, we found seroma was there. We asked the patient to turn up after for observation, and she didn't turn up.
Like how huge was the seroma? Like was it significant that it was troubling her? Did she complain about it?
No, ma'am. She complained of swelling in the post-operative region, but it was not very much significant. That's why we asked her to come for follow-up after 1 week, but she didn't come back. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, Janani.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
May I make a comment, please?
Yes, please, sir.
For an umbilical hernia of the size of 2.5 centimeters,
Yes, sir.
we do all under local anesthesia, open repair, and do in the morning, and most of them will send back in the evening. Do
Yes,
we
sir.
require that seromas, complications, hematomas, all that, GA, all those things?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think that has to be compared rather than laparoscopic of one versus other. This is my considered opinion. It may be controversial.
Sure, sir. Okay, sir. We'll do it, sir.
Janani,
So Janani,
just one question, just the follow-up, you have not mentioned the follow-up. What is the follow-up you had? How much time did you follow up for? Short term you are telling, but how many months?
Sir, short term 3 months, sir.
3 months.
Yes, sir.
3 months is not significant for recurrence.
2 years.
2 years is
2 years for recurrence.
And didn't you get that lady for telephonic follow-up also?
Yes, sir.
Or?
Yes, sir. I couldn't get her because she didn't give she didn't pick the call, so I couldn't follow her up, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Don't you think that there is a huge dissection in ETEP? The dissection in the ETEP that you have done will be extensive. 15 by 15 centimeters is half feet by half feet. All right.
Yes, sir.
How do you account for less post-operative pain compared to IPOM?
Sir, in any procedures, 5 centimeter, 5 centimeter, we'll cover the mesh plus 5 centimeters, sir.
No. That is what, like you have dissected extensively for ETEP.
Yes, sir.
You do a extensive dissection,
Yes, sir.
retrorectus plane, and you would probably even take few stitches and few transfacial stitches.
Yes,
But how do you account for so less post-operative pain and mobilization within 3 hours? Are you really doing mobilization within 3 hours for a patient with such extensive dissection?
Tackers, sir, to fix the mesh. That is the one thing, and that will cause more pain when patient is moving. And in ETEP we use transfacial sutures, but still the sutures are very loose, sir. Just to anchor it in the subxiphoid region, we are suturing, but it is not very tight, so it will not cause any restriction when the patient is moving. That's why patients are having less pain during movement and yes, sir.
And didn't you have incarcerated hernias? How did you reduce on ETEP? Could you see the content? What if it is a bowel in ETEP?
Sir, if bowel is meticulous dissection, we'll do and we'll reduce it. And strangulated hernias, we didn't include in our studies.
Okay.
Excluded.
Fine. Thank you,
Janani, how many transfacial sutures did you take?
Janani cannot get more time, sir, compared to the other students. You can conclude, Ravi Shankar, sir.
Yeah.
Any questions, put it in the chat box.
Okay. So actually the thing what I have to say to Dr. Rajshekar's question, I think there's one thing which we need to specify. The current, Dr. Rajshekar, sir, the current recommendation is any hernia 1 centimeters or so, or definitely less than 2 centimeters, open hernia repairs are recommended, but beyond 2 centimeters, it is very highly recommended that you use some form of mesh, either in the form of laparoscopic IPOM or IPOM plus or ETEP or any other new procedures that are there. So that is the current recommendation, sir.
No, mesh I am using. We are using mesh. I'm not telling you not with mesh. Open mesh repair.
Yeah.
Under local anesthesia, quite simple.
Definitely.
What's the size of mesh, sir? Rajshekhar, sir?
About 7 by 7.
Sir, is it onlay or sublay, sir?
It is sublay. It is under the rectus, like how they dissected. Yeah.
But can you do that under local?
Yes.
You have to do
Most of it, unless they are very obese. Unless they are very obese, we do under spinal.
Sir, it is interesting. I think you should, publish your results, and then we will see what much controversy it generates. Thank you very much. So with the COVID pandemic, basically all our numbers, as we all know, has reduced dramatically and drastically, and hence we had to, our studies do not reflect the, it does reflect the current predicament we are all going through, because we are not able to, sort of produce good numbers to back up our results. So hence I don't think we can draw many conclusions, but we have tried our level best to sort of produce randomized control trials, despite the fact that these were very testing and trying times. I again thank the Surgical Society of Bangalore, the President Dr. Venkatachala, Secretary Dr. Harish, and the EC for giving us this opportunity to share our experience with the general surgical public of Bangalore city. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. On behalf of Surgical Society Bangalore, I congratulate all the postgraduates for their wonderful presentation and a wonderful selection of the papers and the posters. And they maintained the time to the dot. And I thank Dr. Venkatesh sir to monitor the time. So I have some few announcements to make. So as we know, the Professor B. Anumaya, National
Harish,
CSCP.
Harish,
Sir.
you first thank the hosting institution.
Yes, sir.
And their contributors. While you wait for the results of the paper and poster, you can make the announcements. Okay.
Okay. So I thank Dr. Ravi Shankar, HR sir, HOD of Department of General Surgery, Sagar Hospital, and Dr. Lakshman sir for all the coordination for this program, and Dr. Niranjan and Dr. Nishan for their technical support and coordination. So it is a well-planned program, and it was so innovative and wonderful papers your postgraduates presented. So I thank judges Dr. Rajshekhar MR and Dr. Shikhar Pai and Dr. Mahesh for their participation as judges. So as we know, Professor B. Anumaya Memorial.
Harish, sorry to interrupt you. We have Rajshekhar Reddy sir, faculty.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Rajshekhar Reddy sir, for your participation. So the National CSCP, that is Professor B. Anumaya Memorial National Program, will be held between 21st to 26th November. So we have in that Professor B. Anumaya Memorial Oration, Nityananda Shetty Endowment Lecture, and state level surgical quiz, and Professor M. Atikeshwalu Memorial Oration. So the EC is discussing the date, the time, duration, and the registration process for the same. So it will be shortly announced and informed to the respective HODs of all the medical colleges and the institutions. So kindly make a good registration and good participation for that program. So in this month, Surgical Societies plan to conduct CMEON, that is Ethics in Surgery, in two parts. That is, first part will be conducted on 24th Saturday. The second part of the same program will be held on 31st of this Saturday. So kindly make your presence. Is an online program. Best poster and papers. The best poster award will go to Dr. Ajit BD for a rare case of bilateral nematocele in post-COVID patient. The best paper award will go to Dr. Saurav Mujamdar for the paper A prospective randomized control trial on the effectiveness of training in laparoscopic camera navigation using box trainers in novices. Second best paper is by Dr. Ajit for the prospective study of effect of frailty on surgical outcomes in elderly patients. I congratulate all the winners.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So we will stand up for the national anthem. I request Dr. Lakshman sir to.
Oh, I'm not prepared for it. Just hold on. Let me see if I can do it. Okay. I thought
Nishant may be having it.
Nishant may be having it. Let's just hold on for a bit. Let me see. I'm sorry, but I wish. Okay, I can do it. I can do it.
While we are waiting, I thank Dr. Lakshman, Dr. Niranjan, Dr. Rajshekar Reddy, Dr. Muni Reddy, and all the surgical, the faculty of Sagar Hospital for their active participation in the whole year, and all the students for having a good workout and presenting the papers with dedication. Thank you very much.
Dr. Ravi, my heartfelt wishes to your whole team. Excellent work.
Thank you, Kalaivani. Thank you, madam.
Yeah, can you stop sharing the screen, please? I need to start sharing the screen.
Sir, 2 minutes.
Team Sagar, stop sharing the screen,
Yes,
please.
yes.
Okay, we should be ready for the national anthem now, please.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा जलधि तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा गण गण मंगलदायक जय हे जय हे जय हे जय हे
Thank you, one and all.
Good night, everyone.
Okay, I'll stop the meeting now with the permission of the chair.
So please do
Good
it, sir.
night.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Good night, everybody, for attending.